So we just bought one of the rarest, most unusual cars on the road today, and it cost under $4,000, and I think you should buy one too as soon as you can, because one day these cars are going to be really sought after. It's a two-door aluminum monocoque, manual transmission. Sports car is a stretch, but here it is, the first generation Honda Insight. I have been obsessed with these cars since the age of 6 years old. This is one of the weirdest, most wonderfully strange cars on the road today, but they're getting rarer and rarer by the minute. Let's talk about it. The Honda Insight is a truly bizarre little car. This was sold between 2000 and 2006 here in the US, and it's just bizarre. It really is. It's a two-seater, sleek back coupe with a 3-cylinder engine, a hybrid system, and a completely aluminum monocoque. This was kind of a sales debacle for Honda, and I think they lost a huge amount of money on the project, but it means that these cars are going to become really collectible one day. The first generation Honda Insight not only looks like a futuristic doorstop, but this is one of the most important cars of the modern era, because this car introduced the hybrid technology to the mainstream. That's right, electrification. Now, electric cars and hybrids are nothing new. They can date back all the way to the early 20th century, and then they kind of died, and they had a brief and rather sad resurgence in the 1970s, and they died again. But the Honda Insight really was the first mainstream automobile to reintroduce the hybrid into American minds all the way back in the late 90s and early 2000s. In fact, the Insight beat the Prius to the market here in the US by about 7 months. So this car really was very much ahead of its time. One of the weirdest things about the Insight, other than the fact that it's a two-door manual transmission hybrid, is the fact that it's all aluminum. And to demonstrate, I've got my magnet of trust here. So here is Case's beautiful Harley Davidson, and you can see the magnet does in fact work like a magnet on this steel tank. Now let's see if we can get this to stick anywhere on the Honda Insight. So on the hood, nope. On the fender, nope. On the door, nope. What about this structural member? This is the A-pillar. Nope. On the roof, nope. This car genuinely, everywhere you test it, is made out of an aluminum material. The whole monocoque, the sheet metal, you of course do have some plastic materials for like the bumpers, but the net result of that means that this car does not weigh 3,000 pounds. It does not weigh 2,500 pounds. It does not even weigh 2,000 pounds. 1,800 pounds as you see it. Something like 1,870 because this one was equipped with the optional air conditioning. But under 1,900 pounds for a modern day car with airbags and ABS and all the stuff you'd come to expect in 2005. That is berserk. And the wheels, yep, of course, those are aluminum as well, and this was a very special aero design. But the net result of all this aluminum meant that the Insight was ridiculously expensive to manufacture. It was actually built in the same factory in Japan where they pumped out the Acura/Honda NSX and the S2000. This was one expensive car to develop, and that's before we even get to the powertrain. Now, Case's motorcycle here, this Harley Davidson, has a 1200cc V-twin. That's 1.2 liters. We actually have a BMW on loan in the offices right now, a motorcycle with 1.8 liters, 1800cc. So naturally, you'd expect the Insight to be somewhere around 2 liters because it is a full-fledged car. But in fact, what you'll find under the hood is a 3-cylinder 1-liter engine. That's right, 3 cylinders, so it's a transverse setup. They called this the VTEC E engine, and it was designed to burn as little fuel as humanly possible. And it does burn a tiny amount of fuel. This vehicle, when it was brand new, was rated at 70 miles per gallon on the highway. 70.
Now, it is worth noting that 70 miles per gallon has changed a couple times over the years as the EPA has updated their testing procedure. Now, if you look at the 2005 Honda Insight, it's rated at a much more modest 58 mpg highway, which I actually think might be a little bit pessimistic, but we'll have to do some more testing to find out.
That's a huge number, but that little 3-cylinder can't do it alone. The secret to the Insight's insane fuel efficiency was not just due to the fact that it does look like a bar of soap or the fact that it's got the scourged wheels or the aluminum construction or the 3-cylinder engine. It's the magic that was the Honda IMA system. That stands for Integrated Motor Assist. And here's how the basic system works. So up front, you've got the 3-cylinder transversely mounted gasoline engine mated to an electric motor. It's about 2.5 inches thick. Now the electric motor on its own produces just 13 horsepower, but 36 pound-feet of torque. And then that whole chunk of gasoline and electric technology is mated to a 5-speed manual transmission. Now the net result of this was a whopping 73 horsepower and about 91 pound-feet of torque. Now being a hybrid, of course, you'd expect that it can run on electricity for short distances by itself. But this vehicle is not capable of doing that. You see, that little electric motor is just an assist, so it assists under acceleration, maybe cruising, and then when you decelerate, it'll regen battery back into the battery in the back, which is pretty cool. Now, of course, you do see the orange cables throughout the vehicle for the high voltage system. It really isn't all that high voltage of a system compared to modern technology, somewhere around like 140 or 180 volts, whereas new systems are now 400 or 800 volts in a lot of cases. And then this uses nickel metal hydride batteries, which kind of look like little D cells all lined up, about 1 kilowatt hour worth. They do go bad in insights after enough time. This vehicle has had its battery replaced about 4 years ago, along with the engine about 4 years ago, because apparently one of those drive-in service stations where they change your oil screwed up the engine to such a way where they had to sue them and then put $11,000 4 years ago into a new engine and battery. So unlike a Prius or pretty much any other hybrid that start up with no noise whatsoever, the Insight is considerably more old school. So you have to have your foot on the clutch, make sure the 5-speed transmission is in neutral, and then you turn the key, and that little tiny 3-cylinder kind of whirs into life. Very, very weird. And that's before we get to the gauges. These are some of the coolest gauges I've seen in any car. They are really, really unique because they are completely digital. So here's how they work. On the left side, you have a tachometer, which is important because, of course, this is a manual transmission equipped car. To the right of that is a little temperature gauge. Now, up top in the middle is a giant speedometer, which you can change to kilometers an hour. And below that is a computer. So you can see we're averaging 57.3 mpg in this vehicle, 56.4 depending on how you drive it. This little line will show you a real-time instantaneous readout. You've got your trip and all that. Now to the right of that is the fuel gauge. That is of course for gasoline. And to the right of that is the battery gauge, which is a little bit unusual. It'll actually tell you the state of charge of the battery, even though you can't really charge it up unless you drive down a long hill. It will let you know what the state of charge of the battery is. And then this top little thing, the Charge Assist, that monitors basically when you drive, it tells you whether or not you are using the electricity to assist the car in accelerating, or if you're regenerating electricity back into the battery. That's what the charge does. And then up and down are shift indicators. Those help you with the best possible miles per gallon, but really cool gauge cluster, and still looks good even after 215,000 miles. Driving the first generation Honda Insight. What a weird experience to be this low and this close to the ground in a vehicle with such a small amount of power. But actually, even with 73 horsepower, it is quite sprightly. So if you go into first gear and give it all she's got, all right, maybe sprightly is the wrong term, but adequate I think is the right term. It will do highway speeds with little difficulty. Now, driving a manual transmission hybrid is just like driving any other car. It's very, very normal until you look at the charge and assist gauge, as well as the upshift arrow. So when you drive along, at steady state, it'll typically be charging up the battery or just using the gasoline engine. It's not until you accelerate when you get into that assist range, and then the harder you accelerate, the more assist you get out of the electric motor. So for example, if I really give it all she's got, Captain, right from the stop, you can see the assist goes all the way into the orange zone, which means you're getting the most out of that hybrid motor. All right, let me turn off the AC because it sounds like a serpent is living within the vehicle, and we will go to the good old-fashioned windows. Now, apart from that, this car does handle remarkably well. It's 1,800 pounds, it's 1,800 pounds. What else can I say? You make a car that lightweight and it's gonna handle pretty darn well. Even on these 165 width tires, it's pretty good. And I'm really tempted to stick on 195 width tires and see how that does. So I wanna thank you guys for watching my video on this weird, bizarre little car. Now, if you wanna help support this channel and keep us around, maybe check out our Patreon linked below. Patreon's a great way to help support the team. Believe it or not, the TFL Classics channel consistently loses money month over month. It's because we do weird stuff like this. But if you like to see weird stuff like this, be sure to check out our Patreon page. So to get in and out of the Insight is a surprisingly normal process for as weird as the car is. So if you've got a key, you can put it in the door, or just use lock and unlock on the fob. But once you do that, things stop being so normal. Now these seats were a really cool multicolor design, heavily bolstered, and these ones are just gross. This car has 215,000 miles on it, although the engine has 65,000, but that doesn't matter because the seats, they just need a lot of love. But getting in and out of the Insight is kind of a process because this car is so low. It really does feel like a proper sports car or supercar in the seating position. You sit so far down, and then if you're older, getting out of it, oh, bit of a chore. One of the weirder things about the Insight is the driving position, which is just pretty bizarre, and we'll take a look first at the steering wheel. Now, for those of you in the Hondas, you'll notice, yes, this is an S2000 steering wheel, which is probably the most valuable piece on the car, as Case mentioned earlier. But the weirder thing about the steering wheel is not from the fact that it's from a 9,000 RPM sports car, it's the fact that it's off-center from the driver's seat. So you can see it's probably a good 3 inches oriented to the right of the driver's seat, which is just weird. And then the pedals, the gas and the brake pedal, are probably 2 inches apart, and then the clutch pedal is all the way on the left side of the car, 6 inches away from the brake pedal. This one, of course, is missing its little cover too. Got to get a new one of those. But isn't that a little weird? Now, having a manual transmission hybrid is very weird. I can't really think of any others, but someone will let me know in the comment section below if there is a mainstream one. But it is just a normal 5-speed, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And being a Honda, surprisingly crisp. Even after all of these years and miles, it still feels excellent. The clutch feels good as well. Honda really does a good job at engineering a good old 5-speed. All right, so something weird just happened. We're coasting to a stop, and the engine has turned off. If you look here in the gauge cluster, you can see auto stop is blinking, and that's right, even in the year 2000, this car did have auto start stop. Now the weird thing is, you go for the clutch, engine still off. The engine doesn't turn on until you put it into first gear, and then it kind of glides to life and off you go. Now, I thought this would be a disaster because reviewers in 2000 thought that the auto start stop was really annoying, as do reviewers in 2021, but this is a beautifully well integrated example of auto start stop. It works remarkably well. So apart from that, as we accelerate up to speed, put the windows up, kind of a lot of road noise. I don't think they used a lot of sound deadening in this vehicle. Steering is a little bit slow and a little bit vague. Believe it or not, this does have electric power steering, even in 2000. No hydraulic assist, it's all electric. I mean, it's not horrible, it's a little bit vague. But I do think that this would be a fun car on like an autocross. Really throw it around and see if it'll keep up with anything in class. There we go, came to a stop again, engine's off. That is a really weird experience in a manual transmission, but then put your foot on the clutch, first gear, engine kicks on, and off you go. Now the climate controls in the Insight are also properly bizarre. By the way, air conditioning was an option, which is an option I would strongly recommend if you live in a warm climate, but this one does have it, so push the auto function, and it kind of sighs and groans into life. But here's how it works. So you've got this little funky knob, and you can control the automatic temperature. Not an up and down arrow, but actually a physical knob. And then we've got different modes of where the air flows. We've got the rear defrost button, the front defrost button, recirc, and then off. And then up here is the button for Econ, and that is if you want to turn off the AC compressor so you save more fuel. So to the left of the steering wheel, some other weird controls. The FCD button cycles through the various different trip displays. This panel is actually, believe it or not, your window switch. So you've got both the driver and the passenger window switches over here, and this main button is the lockout. Now just over here are your power mirror controls, but apart from that, there are literally no other buttons on this interior. There's no cruise control, I think that's the only option we're really missing. This one has an aftermarket head unit in it, unfortunately, but yes, a very, very basic interior. So the Insight is a hatchback, or is it more of like a camback? But basically you've got these two glass panels that lift up at the push of a button underneath the Honda logo. So you've got the small glass panel here and the large one up here with, of course, the integrated wiper. Now that lifts up via a couple of struts and reveals the trunk space, which is fairly cavernous for the size of the car. This is a really small car. Now underneath here, you've got a fairly large storage cubby, which is nice, and the battery lives right about here. It's, I don't know, about the size of an extremely large toaster. It's a nickel metal hydride design, and actually, that is a replaceable item. The batteries are remanufactured by a couple of companies. One company I found typically sells them for about $1,500 to $2,000, and then it's a 2 to 3 hour job to go ahead and replace that battery with a set of 10, 12, and 8 millimeter basically wrenches. So it's a very simple job, but of course you do have to pay the $1,500 to get the new battery. All right, this person in the Focus decided to go, even though it was my turn, but let's see if we can keep up. Full throttle, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 RPM in a second. Yeah, it's not a fast automobile. It is fairly adequate, just it is geared tall. You can definitely tell it's built for fuel economy. Now, things to look out for if you want to buy a used Honda Insight. Well, most of them have been thrashed and put away wet, and I kind of thought this was an exception, but I think this car has been thrashed and put away wet. I will say the battery does seem to be in pretty good condition. If you're test driving one of these and you floor and you're on the throttle and the battery indicator just drops to zero, there's a good chance that the high voltage battery needs to be replaced. Now, you can drive these cars on a bad high voltage battery, but it's not ideal. They're not going to perform very well, and eventually could leave you stranded because it'll probably kill the 12 volt eventually as well. So high voltage batteries are a concern. As we talked about, they can be replaced for $1,500, $2,000. But then again, you're talking about a car that's probably worth $2,500, $3,000. We paid $3,900 for this car, and that was probably way too much in retrospect. But we did get a little bit excited about this vehicle. Other things that go bad: catalytic converters go bad, motor mounts go bad. That's pretty common. You know, at the end of the day, it's a Honda. This is 215,000 miles, and it still feels remarkably solid. And that really does, you know, lend a big self to the Japanese engineering that went into these things. They are very well made vehicles, and as long as you take care of them, change the oil every now and then, you know, drive them around so the batteries, you know, got some voltage in it occasionally, I think it'll last you a long time. Nickel metal hydride batteries are kind of heavy and inefficient by modern standards, but they're typically pretty darn long lived. And I really do like driving this car. It really is an engaging thing to drive, just because it's so small, lightweight, and just so weird. So you can really see the attention to detail given to the absolute aerodynamic necessity of the Insight by taking a look at the tailpipe. Now, it actually pops out from underneath the rear valence. There's a hole cut out, and look how tiny it is. It looks like the tailpipe you'd find on a lawnmower. They styled it to look like, I don't know, a toad or something. Very weird, and of course, two-seater, totally impractical for most people. Really, this was kind of like an experiment. Honda wanted to see how people would perceive a hybrid. They wanted to see how people would drive a hybrid. And basically they just said, engineers, go do your thing. Go do it. We'll see how many we sell. They plan to sell 6,500 of these every year from 2000 to 2006, but they sold 17,000, only 17,000 globally in the whole world over 6 years. And most of them here in the States were bought and then thrashed and then thrown away. So they're very, very, very rare nowadays. And even ones like this one that have more rock chipping on the front than I believe would ever have been possible are getting kind of hard to find. But anyways, let's keep talking about some of the weird things. Continuing on with the tires. So these are 14-inch wheels wrapped in a whopping 165 R14 tire. Very low rolling resistance. I believe these to be the actual factory equipped tires. These are called Bridgestone Potenza RE92s. You can still buy them today, but that is a must if you want to get the most out of your Insight in terms of fuel economy. So what do you think of the first generation Honda Insight? I'm very excited about it because I'm a nerd. Case is less excited about it because he's not a nerd, but leave me a comment below on what you think of one of the most important cars of the 20th and 21st century. Now, what is this vehicle named? Bert, but because it's a hybrid, we're calling it Hybert. So welcome to the fleet for as long as you may. I think we're going to have some fun with it. I want to do a fuel economy test against a motorcycle to see if in fact that little hybrid system is still pretty good 20 years later, or in this case 15 years later, because this is a 2005. Well guys, thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned to TFL Classics. We got a lot more cool stuff coming. I promise we'll get back to trucks and the usual SUV stuff that you're probably excited for, but I wanted to show off the new little Insight. We'll see you next time.